You bored yet? Even I'm getting tired. I'm going to start that quote over. It was Whitehead saying, quote, "Evolution on a materialistic theory is reduced to the role of being another word for the description of the changes of the external relations between portions of matter. There is nothing to evolve, because one set of external relations is as good as any other set of external relations. There can be merely change, purposeless and unprogressive. But the whole point of the modern doctrine is the evolution of the complex organisms from antecedent stages of less complex organisms." End quote. The doctrine of matter as merely externally related stuff in a continual process of change according to certain ultimate preconditions is no longer tenable, for reasons discovered in both the biological as well as the physical sciences. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection, though its discoverer does not take it this far, was the first crack in the foundation of Newton's edifice. The final sentence of Darwin's Origin reads, quote, "There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers, having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms or into one, and that, whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple in beginning, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved." It's from the Origin of Species. Darwin's mistake is to assume that the law of gravity is fixed. He fails to extend the formative influence of evolution far enough. But worse for the implications of his theory within his own field of biology, he assumes that the law of formation is just as fixed, having been imposed upon matter from without by God into a few forms or into one at the dawn of life. This is why Darwin's theory, even though first described in a book entitled The Origin of Species, tells us nothing of scientific value about the origin of life. For natural selection to be of any use as a theory of biological form, we must presuppose the self-creation and natural purpose of individual organisms. Only given the latter does the former shed any light on the subsequent development and diversification of the biosphere. Darwin's attempt to account for the organization of the living fails because he has too abstract a conception of space, time, and matter, mistaking the quantities of Newtonian equations for the durations of living experience, where each event, though continuous with the last, introduces novelty at every turn. Newton's conception of space and time were that each was a vast container indifferent as to what filled them, and even indifferent to each other. Matter shuffled through, blindly obeying arbitrarily imposed laws. Darwin could not account for the emergence of life in such a cosmos, and so was forced to call on divine intervention. But contemporary physics no longer understands time and space as separate or as absolute. Each shares a common history, having grown up together through the process of cosmic expansion. Matter, similarly, is intimately related to the development of space and time, and is itself not so much a kind of stuff as a process of dynamic unfolding. Having gained a better handle on the potential for the emergence of thermodynamic order found throughout nature, contemporary physics is now in a position to supplement the, quote, "aimless, aloof, and external power of natural selection with the willful, self-sufficient, and internal power of self-organization," end quote. Evolution really is what art mechanist Daniel Dennett calls a universal acid. That's from Darwin's Dangerous Idea. It leaks out of biology and distorts traditional ways of thinking in every field it comes into contact with. But it cannot be understood as a mindless, purposeless, algorithmic process, unless we somehow exempt the Cartesian Newtonian paradigm, or what Gebser calls the deficient mental structure of consciousness, from evolution's reach. Evolution is a theory that points to the common origin of the many, not just at some distant moment in the past, but as a present reality, as every living creature owes its continued existence to its relationship with the rest. Evolution, when understood in a more expanded cosmological sense than Darwin intended, is incompatible with the doctrine of external relation, which is the foundation of materialism. The progress in the field of thermodynamics over recent decades, specifically the work of Ilya Prigogine, has established that the irreversibility of time is essential to the emergence of order in nature. This is a direct break with all the mechanistic attempts to account for time, which did not recognize anything essential whatsoever about its direction. Newton's equations give the same results no matter which direction time runs. This is also true for all equations expressing relativistic or quantum effects. Einstein himself once remarked that, quote, time, as irreversible, is an illusion, end quote. For Prigogine, however, the directionality of time was essential for any account of non-equilibrium systems and the creative advance that they allow. In his book, The End of Certainty, Prigogine quotes a few lines from Jorge Luis Borges' essay entitled A New Refutation of Time, which I think are worth reprinting here. Quote, after describing the doctrines that make time an illusion, Borges concludes, subquote, and yet, denying temporal succession, denying the self, denying the astronomical universe, are apparent desperations and secret consolations. Time is the substance I am made of. Time is a river which sweeps me along, but I am the river. It is the tiger which destroys me, but I am the tiger. It is a fire which consumes me, but I am the fire. The world, unfortunately, is real. I, unfortunately, am Borges. End quote. Whitehead's notion of concrescence, derived from the Latin verb meaning growing together, is an attempt to reconcile permanence and change in Prigogine's words. Whitehead recognizes the essential role played by time in the creative unfolding of the universe, and his analysis of concrescence allows us to understand what Borges was aiming at when he said that time is the substance we are made of. As we said at the outset, life is a moving image of eternity. We cannot account for its organization in terms of the stuff of which it is made. We can only grasp its essence when it is understood as inseparably related to its entire past, as well as to the futures that remain possible for it. Part 5. Whitehead's process of concrescence. Section A. Non-sensuous perception. Quote, the philosophy of organism aspires to construct a critique of pure feeling, and the philosophical position in which Kant puts his critique of pure reason. This should also supersede the remaining critiques required in the Kantian philosophy, end quote. It's Whitehead from Process and Reality. All of the mechanistic thinkers we have thus far criticized commit the fallacy of misplaced concreteness because of inherited patterns of thought dating back to the Greeks. Aristotle can be praised for recognizing the immanence of nature's purposes, but he can be damned for having introduced the substance-quality logic that led to the sensationalist doctrine. The sensationalist doctrine mistakes a high abstraction, universals derived from bare sense perception, for the most primitive, concrete element in sense experience, what Whitehead calls sense reception. This led to the unchecked spatialization of time, with all its rigidifying effects discussed above. Whitehead adopts Bergson's, quote, admirable phraseology to explain why. Quote, sense reception is unspatialized, and sense perception is spatialized, end quote. The sensationalist doctrine collapses the unspatialized experience of the transmission between occasions, and so entirely ignores the immanent teleology found therein. This ignorance of what Whitehead calls sense reception is the reason the mechanistic paradigm is unable to account for sentience of any stripe. It led Hume to deny the soundness of induction, for with only sense perceptions to go on, he could merely correlate sequential observations. Causation, as Kant would later deduce based on Hume's premise, was purely an assumption projected on experience by the operations of our intellect. Whitehead blames this misplaced concreteness on the Greeks' over-reliance on visual perception, which Gebser also points to as the dominant mode of sensory experience in the mental structure. Sense reception can be described as the temporally extended experience in the mental structure. Sense reception can be described as the temporally extended experience of one's own bodily existence. such that the immediate past and the immediate future are both constitutive elements in every passing moment. Part 7.